Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives, episode 104. Today, we are bringing back our very dear friend, Dr. Charles Kriel. He and his wife, Kat Gellin, directed two incredibly important documentaries, one of them being Data and Disinformation, investigating Cambridge Analytica, and the other one delving into why people believe in conspiracies. That one is titled The Disinformation Age. He was also a special advisor in the UK on their Disinformation Committee panel, which investigated Cambridge Analytica. He's going to teach us how we build resiliency around democracy. Have a listen.
With 10 likes, I can predict your behavior better than your coworker. With 300 likes, I can predict your behavior better than your wife. But what they're really saying there is by algorithmically observing your behavior, I can learn to understand you and figure out how to push you to extremes. So if you're somebody who is politically in the middle, it's really very unlikely that I'm going to turn you into an extreme leftist. But if you are somebody who is on the left and pretty far out in the margins of the left, I can probably push you to extremism. I can get you so wound up and so angry because I know what you're afraid of, or I know what pushes your buttons, and I can do the same with the right. What's new is I can micro-target to scale. So I can do this to millions of people at a time now.
All right, Dr. Charles Kriel, we are so happy to have you back with us. Our friends, of course, know you from your incredible documentaries on narrative warfare and lack of privacy restrictions and all of that, the brilliant work that you do with Kat. But can you sort of give us a recap on the recent elections in the UK and what your observations are there?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be here. The elections in the UK, after 14 years of conservative government, of Tory rule, the Labour Party won by a landslide, both in Scotland, in the across England, Wales, etc. It was an interesting election to watch, but it was also inevitable that Labour was going to win. This country has been, to a large degree, run down between Brexit, between 14 years of austerity. Austerity measures are something that's supposed to last a couple of years, but it just became permanent austerity here. The number of children in poverty in this country after 14 years of Tory rule, the chaos, prime minister after prime minister without an election, et cetera, et cetera. There was no amount of Russian interference that could have kept the Labour Party from winning this. Really, there was nothing that could have been done that would have kept Labour out.
Oh my gosh, I love to hear that. And our good friend on this show, Keir Giles, who wrote Russia's War on Everybody, I just happened to see him a couple of weeks ago in the UK, and he thought that the new laws that you actually had a hand in, that you actually helped advise, may have played a role in dialing down at least the trafficking of disinformation, because if you mule hacked goods, you now actually, there's actually a legislation gap that was filled in that actually makes that, prosecutable. So do you think that may have played a role, or do you just think it was just so many years of bad Tory rule?
Well, I think what we're talking about is the online safety bill, and which was passed after a lot of back and forth between the House of Lords, between the government. It was watered down in certain aspects, but it's still a good shot at a beginning of online legislation. I think it's optimistic to think that it may have tamped down any kind of Russian interference in this recent election. The main reason I think it's optimistic is that it's great to pass a bill, to make something a law, but then you have to fund the enforcement of it. And I don't feel like there's robust funding of the enforcement of the online safety law in this country.
That's a really important point. One more question from me, and then guys jump in. My question for you that I really need help with is, we just had a big shakeup here in America. Joe Biden has stepped down. He has endorsed Kamala Harris. You know what happened to America 8 years ago and how misogyny was used to deprive America of its first female president. Where can you advise Americans on how to prepare and armor up for narrative warfare?
Well, the main thing to do is to be resilient, and build resilience as much as you possibly can. Build it amongst your friends, build it amongst your family, talk to people, and listen to people. Now, this is, I joke about this, that you, well, it's not a joke, that you can mass radicalize people, but you have to de-radicalize them one person at a time. And de-radicalization requires listening to people's grievances, understanding what they think is unfair, hearing what they're angry about, hearing who they're angry about, even if it's inappropriate. And I frankly don't have the patience for that myself. I'm much more comfortable in the role of saying, y'all should do this. I don't want, it's the same reason I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not sure that I could sit and listen to someone's problems for an hour, 8 hours a day. But it is indeed what needs to happen. We do need to hear people's grievances up to a point. The limit on that is we don't need to hear their racism, and we don't need to hear their misogyny, and we don't need to hear their homophobia, and we shouldn't provide an environment where that can be aired. And I think we should make it clear that you can't speak that way. Now, I grew up to a large degree in Alabama. I spent an awful lot of my youth in rooms listening to jokes and listening to talk, that it was just better that I just kept my mouth shut rather than say, well, Buford, you can't talk like that. And had I think I wouldn't have fared as well as I possibly did. But we're in an era now where we need to make it clear that there's no place for racism. I'm very impressed by what's happened in the last 24 hours. I was against Biden stepping down. I thought it would be disastrous. I was quite upset about it. I tweeted a couple of angry tweets that I've since taken down about it. But what I am seeing is at least the media is showing a sense of unity right now. And this bad Biden narrative, which I have always thought was about Kamala, and it was about Democratic donors thinking that American voters would not elect a Black woman president, and specifically Kamala Harris president. And so they didn't want to bring Biden down. They wanted to bring down the whole ticket. I'm not the only person who thinks that. I think AOC thought that as well. But although she didn't state it so directly, but she took an hour to say what she had to say. But people seem to be lining up behind her. And if they're lining up behind her, it's terrific, because the main issue on the table right now is authoritarian fascism. This isn't friendly fascism anymore. This is outright fascism that we're dealing with now. And sitting here in Europe, where we're all in danger of becoming frontline states. I mean, we're all frontline states in the information war, but we're in danger of becoming other kinds of frontline states. It's incredibly important that Trump not be elected, that NATO not be weakened, that there's not a military alliance between the United States, Russia, and China, that we not throw out what has been set up for a very long time, so that we can make a game show host a dictator over a country.
Can I ask you a question? Since you brought up racism, and I think you're absolutely right, by the way. I spent a lot of time not even so much defending Joe Biden as telling the Democrats and the media to stop smearing him in public, because what it seemed to me like was they were trying to replace the entire ticket, right? That's why it was pass the torch, and there were astroturfed protests and all kinds of crap, right? And the heartening thing to me has been exactly as you said, the instant pivot to let's go. I think that's a very healthy sign. And I think we constantly underestimate America's willingness to do the right thing.
I hope we
Me too. We don't have a choice, so let's go. But I wanted to ask you about because racism obviously is already being brought up as a huge issue. Brexit. Speaking of influence ops, Cambridge Analytica came in and used what was already latent racism, just as they did in America, to radicalize people, a certain subset of people, about a terrifying, invasion of immigrants, and basically managed to get the United Kingdom to shoot itself in the face. Now, the fascinating thing to me is that if you look at the charts, since Cambridge stopped and said, the disapproval of Brexit has just gone straight up, which seems to me the perfect example of what happens when psyops wear off. Right? So I just wanted to get your feeling about, that, whether that seems like a correct assessment, and how that relates to the current campaign.
I think psyops have worn off, but also reality has kicked in here in the UK, and
more or less the same thing.
Yeah, we know. I mean, we can feel the damage that Brexit has done. We can feel it in every aspect of society here. It's really very clear, from really stupid stuff like families going on holiday now are more inconvenienced when they go on holiday and they don't understand why, through to people who were racist against Europeans. I'll resist the obvious joke of they all look alike to me. But people who were in fact racist against Europeans have now found that, well, our country has more immigrants coming through every year than it had before Brexit, but everybody is now coming from places where people don't look like Brits anymore. And you feel it in the society, and I think it's terrific. That's great, but not everybody does. So they're feeling that aspect of it too. It's why the Reform Party has done so well here, because Brexit was such a disaster, hasn't fixed any of what people were perceiving as problems, and they weren't real problems. Immigration is not a problem. Immigration is a bonus, particularly in this country. And it just didn't seem to work out. I mean, interestingly, one of the disasters of this election, despite the Tories being out and Labour being in, is that in Clacton, Nigel Farage ran as the leader of the Reform Party and won a seat, which is a shame. He almost immediately got on a plane and flew to the Republican convention, which is also a shame, as the new government is coming into office. And he certainly showed his disdain for the people of this country by doing so, because he wasn't here to take his office properly. Giles Watling, who was a Conservative MP in Clacton, and although Conservative, I have a great deal of respect for Giles, and he was a lovely guy, lost his seat to Reform. Reform put a lot of money into this campaign, and if there was any foreign interference, it probably went to Clacton to make sure that this man won his seat. Brexit's been a disaster here. I think most people would say that it's a disaster. Our wages are low, our unemployment is high, the film industry, production industry, the media industries are in terrible shape. 75% of people in production are out of work in this country right now. It was one of the leading things we had. Banks have moved out. That's one of the leading things that we had. We can't hire the right people for hospitals. It just goes on and on and on. And inflation has been incredible. So it really is a proper disaster. Brexit has been a disaster. And Yes, it was very much brought on by Russian interference, by interference from Cambridge Analytica as well, that moved things in that direction. And that's how I started working on this whole thing, was seeing the patterns in Brexit and the way that that was working. But it also happened, and the racism happened that brought on Brexit because of Russian-sponsored the Russian-sponsored refugee crisis. By creating instability in Africa and the Middle East, refugees have come over the borders into Europe in droves and into the UK. And this is a method for Russia to create instability and to magnify hatreds that already exist across Europe. And it's paying off well for them.
Wow. One more from me, but hi-fi, you go.
Given Labor's ascension to power, given in France you have a centrist and leftist government that will take shape, I believe. Do you see accountability for the tech oligarchs who have manipulated populations the way they have with the tools they have, such as Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, Twitter, etc.?
I don't think there'll be real accountability. I think there'll be new sets of rules that everybody has to follow. And so they'll have to change their business model a little bit, and it might cost them millions, but it won't cost them the billions that perhaps it should.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. This has been such a great conversation, and I've already learned so much and been reminded of so much. But my question for you is something that Jim mentioned earlier. Both Jim and I spotted this pass the torch kind of trope, and we saw, I saw, previous narrative warfare tropes in that. I saw what happened in Trinidad when Cambridge Analytica faked up this whole movement that then became a real movement and tried to pin it on the youth. And I saw the astroturfing continuing with that. And you said something very brilliant. And when you were actually testifying, I believe it was in Trinidad, when there's always this thing that the tech reporters say and the oligarchs say, which is like, well, we have no evidence that these operations actually worked. And your direct quote was, an attempted murder is still a criminal. So my question is twofold. One, how do we spot these ops quicker, faster, and then triage them? And how do we explain to people any meddling is still a criminal act?
I think we have to have trust in our civil society and in our NGOs. And unfortunately, the people who are getting attacked, like Soros, Open Society, etc., they're getting attacked precisely because they're so effective and because they're very good at spotting these kinds of ops, calling them out, promoting democracy, etc. We need to start treating. I mean, look, I'm going to go to North Macedonia pretty soon to work on some Western Balkans, promoting democracy there and working against disinformation. We need to do the same kind of operations in the United States at the moment, unfortunately, and it's becoming really important. We need to work on building resilience around democracy. We need to work on a dialogue that talks about disinformation and talks about democracy. It's really important. There's a internet research creative foundation in Amsterdam that kind of invented the internet in Europe called DVAG. And at DVAG, they recently did a survey of people. We're going to talk about AI for a minute because it's become my new thing. I've become a specialist in it. Everybody who tells you they're a specialist in AI means they just hammer out prompts all day long, right? They probably smoke weed while they do it. But the DVAG surveyed a number of people working in tech to ask what they thought the greatest threat that would come from AI would be, and they felt like it would be inequality of access. That was their number one thing, and their number two thing was disinformation. But when they surveyed the public, not IT professionals, the public thought the main problem would be disinformation. And number two would be inequality of access. And this means what we've been doing the past 5 years has been working. And people are getting the message and they understand what an issue disinformation is out there. I believe that's starting to happen in the United States. I would love to see it happen in my home state of Alabama. I don't think it is. I'd love to see it happen all across America, but I just don't think it is. And I don't know how you can watch the clown show that we all saw last week, which unfortunately also happens to have a trailer attached to the clown car that carries fascism. And not think that we just have an awful lot of work to do when it comes to building resilience against disinformation and authoritarianism.
Oh, thank you so much. That was everything that I needed. I'm loving this theme of building resilience, around democracy. I think that is the theme that we need. And I think Jim is right. I think that all the work that we've been doing is having some sort of impact, and that there is some indication that some of the psyops is wearing off, or as you said, things have just gotten so bad. Anything else, gentlemen?
I just wanted to point out that I agree with you about AI. I've also spent a lot of time in AI, and there's a reason why Elon Musk is making such a huge play for it. There's a reason why Peter Thiel, in my view, one of the closest approximation to the Antichrist, invested in OpenAI very early. They understand the power of it, and I'm hopeful that the public is becoming more aware of it. But for me, I'm not sure if it's really sunk in how dangerous it is.
Thank you for that, Jim. Hi-Fi, do you have any final thoughts?
Would you like to share a little bit about your new project with us, Doctor?
Oh, yes. Anything that you're working on. Great idea.
I'm actually working on a drama right now, so I'm not sure how interesting that is for you, but it's completely off piece from the last two films. It's about a K-pop princess living in Los Angeles in Point Doom Trailer Park in Malibu, who has a secret life because she's on the run from a Koreatown gang by day, but by night she's an online superstar.
Oh my God, count me in. Like, I need that. That is exactly what I need in my life. Yeah.
And it's AI driven. We're doing all the video, all the visual with AI. So it's a really interesting project. I'm pretty fascinated by it, and we seem to be getting people excited. If I can just wrap up with one thought, and this is really incredibly important. If we have to do whatever it takes, all working together, put aside whatever our ideologies are, put aside whatever our irritations are, we need to absolutely ensure that Trump and the authoritarians do not win, and that Ukraine does not lose.
Thank you. Thank you.
Multimedia is a powerful social factor in defining whether this specifically influenced someone's behavior in a particular direction in a commercial or political sense. It's not an exact science.
I would agree with you completely, and I think that establishing the efficacy of five-factor modeling or any other kind of modeling is incredibly difficult. You can certainly gather enough reports that will come down on either side as to whether this is effective or whether this is not effective. What I would say is the effectiveness of it should not have an impact on the pursuit of the pursuit of illegality. If data has been gathered illegally, if someone has gathered a lot of data illegally and then what they've done with it is a mess and doesn't work, it doesn't matter. It's still illegal. If I attempt to murder somebody and I'm just really bad at murder, I'm still an attempted murderer.